Growing up and for most of my young adult life, I believed that holiness meant distance. That's what I was taught. Distance from the world, distance from people who didn't believe like I did, certainly distance from sinners, distance from anything that felt messy, confusing, or morally complicated. But here's a tension that we rarely talk about. Jesus was the holiest person that's ever lived, and yet he didn't separate himself from people. He constantly moved toward them. So we have to ask this uncomfortable question. If holiness means separation, why did Jesus keep crossing the lines? That's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to Thinking Aloud, the show where we expose cultural Christianity, dismantle the bad belief systems that keep us stuck, so that we can think our way to freedom through the power of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Michael Wilson. Thank you for tuning in to this episode where we're going to be talking about this idea that holiness means separation. So the first thing I want to do is I want to name the problem that holiness has been weaponized into spiritual isolation. Holiness has been weaponized into spiritual isolation. Somewhere along the way, we have used holiness as a means of insulation from us to the world. We were taught to be holy meant things like staying uncontaminated, keeping moral distance, avoiding people who might pull us down. As a matter of fact, when I was young, when I was a teenager, I was consistently taught that if I wasn't careful, that if I hung around the wrong people, they could pull me down rather than me being able to pull them up. I was taught to stay away from things like playing cards and going to dances and even listening to any kind of music that wasn't Christian. It was all in an effort to keep us holy, but what it really did was it put us on a track of performance, and it also put us on a track of insulation, isolating ourselves from the very people that we were trying to reach. It was great if they came to us, and that's what we were wanting. We were wanting them to come to us, to come to our church. But rarely were we encouraged to go to them, because to go to them meant we were going into the world, and we certainly didn't want to be seen in the wrong places or be seen with the wrong people, because again, they might very well pull us down. And to justify it, we quoted the Apostle Paul, "Come out from among them and be separate." But here's the problem. Many of us use that verse to protect our comfort, not our integrity. It's easy to use that verse as a means of not being responsible to show the world how loving and compassionate and wonderful our Father is. It's an easy way, an easy justification to stay within our own comfort zone, to isolate ourselves within the walls of our own church around people that believe like we do, behave like we do, and not go out into the messy world where we might be confronted with issues that maybe we don't know how to deal with or make us uncomfortable. And we'll use holiness as a means to justify our comfort. And unfortunately, I have done that. And there are many churches that teach this. Maybe you're in a church that's teaching this now, but yet something doesn't feel quite right with it. And you look at Jesus and think, well, if he was known as the friend of sinners, then why don't I have very many sinner friends in my life? And the other thing that we have to be careful with is that we don't see people as projects, that we don't try to go out and get friends that aren't Christians in order to just simply get them saved, because then they become a project and we miss seeing them as a real human being. And what we oftentimes call holiness, it really functions as fear management, fear of being influenced, fear of losing control, or fear of being misunderstood. Oftentimes, pastors will preach messages of holiness, but they're really fear-based messages so that the pastor, not knowingly, but I think subconsciously, because we've been trained in this system of control. So the pastor will preach messages about staying away from the world because he's fearful of losing his members. And again, I don't believe that we do this knowingly. I didn't do it knowingly. I legitimately thought that I was preaching the gospel, when in reality, I was using fear as a means to control people. I didn't know it then, but I do now. I didn't recognize it then, but I can certainly recognize it now. And I never want holiness to become a wall instead of a way of life. Because you can be holy in the midst of the deepest, darkest, sinful place. You can be holy. And that's what we're going to look at. So, now that we've named the problem, let's expose the flaw. That separation was never the point. Transformation has always been the point. I want you to think about this. If separation really is the issue, then when people give their lives to Jesus, when they get saved, when they become born again, why doesn't God just kill them and take them home and take them to heaven so that they never have to deal with the contamination of the world ever again? Many people have that mentality that because they're always waiting for the rapture to come because they want to escape this planet and escape the corruption that's in it. And yet, when we look at the life of Jesus, the Word, became flesh and dwelt among us. God became flesh and dwelt in the deepest, darkest places of our humanity. And so when we talk about Paul and Paul's writing to come out and be separate, he isn't talking about isolation, and that really matters. When Paul says, come out and be separate, he's not telling people, not telling Christians to withdraw from people or to withdraw from where they live and go live in a commune somewhere. In fact, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul's very clear that if you try to avoid broken people, if you try to avoid non-Christians, you'd have to leave the world entirely. And then when you think about the fact that the early church that Paul's writing to was very, very small. If they removed themselves, they wouldn't have very many people to talk to. They wouldn't be able to live. So what is Paul talking about? Paul is addressing identity and allegiance, not proximity to people. He's saying, don't let the broken system of the world define who you are. Don't let corrupted values shape your identity. That our identity comes from being set apart, being separate, being set apart to God as His sons and daughters. But we're not set apart to be isolated or to be better than or to look down upon those who don't follow Jesus. We're set apart to show the world our loving Heavenly Father. We're set apart to be different, to show the world there's a better way. We're set apart to show the world what it really means to be image bearers of God. And you can't do that if you hide behind the four walls of a church. We have to get out into the world and let our light so shine before men that they see our good works and they glorify the Father who's in heaven. Paul's saying, don't yoke your soul to something that pulls you away from who you are in Christ. This is about who's forming us, not about who we're sitting with. This is about Jesus transforming us from the inside out, not about who we go eat lunch with or who we work with or who we're friends with. This is an important distinction. Because Jesus reframes holiness. And what we have to understand, what I had to understand, was holiness isn't fragile. That if I get around people that don't love Jesus, if I get around people that cuss, That doesn't mean that I have to cuss. It doesn't mean that I'm going to become contaminated. If I get around people that do things that I don't agree with or I don't think God is okay with, that doesn't mean that my holiness is going to be shattered. As a matter of fact, they ought to be able to see something in me that makes them want what I have, that makes them want to follow Jesus. And I'm not talking about being super religious and saying things like, oh, please don't cuss around me, I'm a Christian. No, let them be who they are, but you be who you are. Don't allow them to pull you down, because that would be culture shaping your identity. And we get our identity as sons and daughters from God and by watching Jesus and learning how to be authentically human. Because that's exactly what Jesus did. He redefines holiness by the way he lives it. If God is so holy that he cannot look upon sin, which that's a very popular misquoted verse, then how in the world did Jesus become human flesh, take on human flesh, and become known as the friend of sinners? Yes, God is holy, but he chooses to get down into our mess to bring us up to the level that we lost in Adam. So Jesus redefines holiness by the way he lives it. He touches the lepers. He eats with sinners. He eats with people he's not supposed to eat with. He lets broken people get close. And instead of Jesus becoming unclean, the people who touch him become clean. And that's the scandalous idea of God's grace, that the ones that we think will make us unclean, we can become clean. We can cause them to become clean by the way that we live our lives in front of them. That Jesus, who was a respected rabbi, did things that respected rabbis did not do. He would touch unclean people, and instead of him becoming unclean, they would become clean. Because he shows us that holiness doesn't retreat from brokenness. Holiness actually transforms brokenness. Holiness takes brokenness and says, you are set apart for God. And people might say, but I'm broken, I'm traumatized, I'm hurt, or whatever. And by us living holy, set apart lifestyles, we can pull those people and up into the loving arms of Jesus. We can be his hands and his feet. We can be his heart to them and show them that they too are image bearers of God, and watch their lives be transformed. We can't do that if we isolate ourselves from the world. We have to go where they are. I find it interesting in Luke 15, the parable of the lost sheep. The shepherd leaves the 99 and goes out into the wilderness, wherever that little sheep was, to find that sheep. And he may have had to get down into a ditch, a muddy ditch, to pull his sheep out. And that's exactly what Jesus did. He got down into our mess. He didn't isolate himself in heaven. He came down to where we are, into our deepest, darkest mess. And if your version of holiness, if the version that you're being taught at your church, if your version of holiness cannot survive contact with the darkest, deepest parts of humanity, then honestly, that's not the holiness of Jesus. That's religious holiness, and it won't stand up next to Jesus. So, how do we reform this belief? Let's talk about that. Let's reform our belief by looking at holiness is not separation from people, but it's devotion to love. Holiness is not separation from people, it's devotion to love. Who do we love? Well, we love God. We're supposed to love God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. So we want to live out of that love by not doing anything that would displease him or grieve him. We want to be able to live from that love. And that means being set apart to him. Just like a husband and a wife love one another, and they don't want to do anything that would displease or grieve the other one. And so they are set apart from everybody else strictly to their husband or their wife. So holiness isn't separation from people, it's a devotion to love. And holiness isn't about being unlike them, but it's about being so anchored so deeply in God that love flows out of us without fear. You know, you can be in a room full of unbelievers without absorbing their dysfunction. You can be in a room full of people that's traumatized and hurt and not take on their trauma and their hurt, and you can be a shining light. You can be in a room full of darkness and be the light that dispels the darkness. Your holiness is not fragile. You can be present with people without being pulled off center. You can love without losing yourself. When your identity is rooted in you knowing that you're a son or a daughter of God, knowing that you're accepted and known and belong to Him, then you don't have to fear being contaminated by the world and its broken system. That's what it means to be set apart. It's about knowing your identity. Being set apart is not about being distant, and it's certainly not about being superior. I remember growing up that part of being holy actually caused us to feel and be judgmental towards other people that didn't believe like we did, other churches, other Christians, and certainly against those sinners, the worldly people. But yet holiness should never cause us to be judgmental. It should never cause us to feel like we're superior. If anything, holiness, being set apart to God, should cause our hearts to break for those that don't know Him. It should cause our hearts to break for those that are hurt and lost and the least and the marginalized. And most of all, holiness should keep us grounded in our faith and in our relationship with our Father. So, how do we put this into practice? Well, we have to ask ourselves this question: who or what have I been avoiding in the name of being holy? Now, if you remember earlier, I said growing up, I was taught that you couldn't play cards, you couldn't go to dances, you couldn't listen to music, any music that was not Christian. Certainly couldn't listen to rock and roll. Those were things that we stayed away from. We have to ask ourselves this comfortable question: who am I avoiding thinking that they're going to contaminate me? Or what am I avoiding thinking that it's going to contaminate me? Now, please don't hear what I'm not saying. I am not saying that you can just go out and be around any kind of environment and you're going to be okay. If you've struggled with alcoholism, going to a bar with your best friend to witness or whatever, that might not be the best place for you. I could go into a bar and I am not going to be tempted to drink or get drunk. Now, do I need to go into a bar? No, I'm not saying I do. I'm just saying that I could do that and it would not faze me. Another person wouldn't be able to do that. So we have to use wisdom about where we're going and what we're doing. The point that I want to make, though, is that our holiness isn't fragile. The world's not going to contaminate us when our identity is secure. And in our identity as sons or daughters, we're listening to the Father. And so we're being guided by Him to know where we can go and where we don't need to go. But we do have to ask the question: who are we avoiding, or what are we avoiding, thinking that that's making us holy? For many Christians, they still think that playing cards or dancing or anything of the world they can't do because, well, that would take away their holiness. They wouldn't be holy any longer. And I'm just challenging that assumption. I'm challenging that idea. Maybe for you it is true, but is it true for everyone? And if you're avoiding that because you're afraid, then I would question that. I would challenge that, because we don't live fear-based. We live love-based. So who or what are we avoiding in the name of holiness? Maybe we need to look at it and realize that the people that we're avoiding are not dangerous. Maybe it's just their presence unsettles our sense of control. Maybe their questions about God and theology and the world and the church, maybe that's what makes us uncomfortable. And because we don't have answers, we hide behind the wall of holiness. So this week, I want to challenge all of us, myself included. Let's not try to fix anyone. Let's not try to use our holiness to fix anybody. Let's just be loving and caring. Let's see every single person as a person that has just worth and value to Jesus. Let's see every single person as someone that Jesus died for, that someone Jesus loves, that is someone that Jesus wants to transform. Let's be present to those around us. And let's get rid of our fear. And let's get rid of the belief that our holiness is fragile and that somehow we might lose it by becoming contaminated by the world. Lastly, I want us to give a look at a reflection. Jesus didn't come to separate us from humanity. Jesus came to restore humanity. See, holiness isn't about climbing away from the world and escaping the world. It's about standing firmly in love, standing firmly in our identity while the world may be shaken around us. Our holiness is meant to draw people to Jesus through our lives, through us being set apart, standing secure in God's love for us, so that when their world is shaking, we can become an anchor to point them to the Father. Jesus didn't come to separate us from our humanity. He came to restore humanity. And if your version, or if my version, or anybody else's version of holiness makes us smaller, colder, or more distant, it's probably not true holiness whatsoever. It might simply be fear wearing religious language. And that's what I hope that all of us can come out of, that we don't live in a fear-based, performance-based thing that we call holiness, but that we realize we're simply set apart because God has called us to himself. And when you live in the love and the freedom that the Father offers, you won't want to do things that you're not supposed to do. You won't want to go out and do things that would displease him or grieve him. And you want to see other people come into the life and the truth that he brings, but you won't do it with legalism and performance. You'll do it through kindness, compassion, and mercy, because that's who our Father is. I really hope this has helped you. If it has, I would love for you to subscribe and hit the like button, share this with somebody else. And I've also got a free resource for you that will help you take this idea a little bit further. And you can find that free resource by clicking the link in the bio in the description below. We would love to help you out. And if you are ever in the Northwest Tennessee area, specifically Dyersburg, Tennessee, we would love to have you come and visit us at Renovatus Church. We're a church for misfits, dreamers, and the discontent. We meet every Sunday at 6 p.m. at 202 East Court Street, which is actually the community church. They are so gracious to allow us to use their facility on Sunday evenings, and I know that you would be blessed, and we would be blessed to have you. If you ever want to come visit, reach out and share your story with me. Maybe you grew up in a legalistic culture like I did, that holiness was all about separation. And maybe it's caused you some issues. Maybe you felt uncomfortable with it, or maybe it made you judgmental. Reach out, share your story. I'd love to hear from you. I want to close out with this. You were created by love, out of love, to be loved, and to love. Until next time, God bless.